Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for another fun webinar here with Receivables Info. When we started planning to talk about digital communication strategies, I thought it would be interesting to look at this from the perspective of how we're actually managing the process of getting these digital communications out, how we're strategizing that, but also to talk a little bit about how that ties back into your main platforms and systems in order to improve that strategy and to create a more wholly encompassing type of digital strategy that works in conjunction with your standard communications. And so today I have two very knowledgeable gentlemen with me. I have Ian Winder from Latitude by Genesis and Dave Snow with Remitter. And before we kind of kick it off, I always like to start with a little bit more of a detailed introduction so that you can understand the perspectives of each one of the speakers. So Ian, can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got to the seat that you're in today?
Sure, absolutely. Sure. So I've been in the ARM space, for 30 plus years. Spent a good portion of that actually running the technology function at multiple collection agencies, credit grantors and debt buyers. And I found myself in a situation where I could take an opportunity actually working on the vendor side, on the software side. So I joined what is now Genesis to lead the product strategy group for the development of our solution. So kind of a transition, take what I know, what I'd experienced from being on the consumer side of it and be on the move over to the provider of the tool. So my background.
Excellent, and always a pleasure to be presenting with you. Dave, can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got to the seat that you're in today?
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. Thanks for having us. I've got about 15 years in the consumer finance software and more recently ARM space, always looking for industries where there are win-win solutions for consumers and businesses alike. Previously, I kicked off my career in the renewable energy finance space, where we were structuring finance products for institutional investors where they had tax benefits and favorable IRRs over a 15 to 30 year time span, where homeowners were getting savings on their utility bill, energy independence, and they could go green and feel great about that. We moved into developed the supply chain technology for traceability for upstream and downstream stakeholders in the mineral space. And then more recently, I've moved into the ARM space and enjoying it very much so. I think when I came here, we saw a great opportunity. This industry is on the precipice of change and seeing it transition from the traditional modes of collections into this digital first, digital only collection. So happy to chat about this today.
Awesome. And I feel like most of our guests are probably familiar with me from hosting these webinars, but I come into this industry with about 20 years of experience. I've worked as a debt broker, as a founding partner at Sterling Capital Management, founded CompliArm, the compliance management platform, wrote policies and procedures for major debt buyers, law firms, collection agencies, and creditors. I also run a marketing firm and am the founder of Receivables Info. I also do a lot of consulting in the space that gives me a really wide visibility and depth into various organizations around the space and understanding the things that are and are not working for them. So I'm kind of the fix-it guy that goes around and looks for opportunities and helps organizations to deploy those. And now that everybody's got an understanding of the backgrounds, I want to jump right in here and start having a little bit of fun with this conversation, because I think when we talk about digital strategies, and this is definitely been a hot button topic, especially since Reg F, which kind of opened the door for us to start doing those things. Not to say that we couldn't do them before, but I think it increased the comfort level for organizations to leverage other communication channels. And so what I think we've found from a digital strategy standpoint is some of the challenges that organizations face as they're going through the process of actually deploying a digital strategy, and what are they doing to reduce the friction that the consumer experiences as they're going through the process of resolving an account without a live agent present. And I think that kind of sets the stage for us a little bit here. But with your background in the industry, could we talk a little bit about the how communications have evolved over time?
Sure. I mean, if you think back, not too long ago, but in the past, it was all voice. Everything was phone. Obligatory letters, avoid them when you can because of the cost. But then we got into a different shift, right? And we started to look at digital, and the mindset was, I don't want to talk to a machine. I want to talk to a person. But over the last few years, as we look at, how technology has evolved and people's adoption of that technology, be social media, my phone is always in my hand. I can always respond to an email or an SMS. People don't want to talk to people anymore. Don't call me, send me a text, right? So I think that plays into the collection strategy too, especially when you look at, from a cost perspective. Digital channels are significantly less expensive than the traditional post, perhaps even in voice as well. So I think that's kind of evolved, and the acceptance of that has really taken off.
Absolutely.
I'd add that I think we're seeing that shift away from that traditional modes of collection here, where 75%, over 75% of homeowners rely on wireless cell phones in their homes. Those cell phones have automated filters, caller ID, spam filters. 2019, we started seeing the automated robocalls or spam filters built in, provided by cell phone carriers. And so the right party contact rates have dropped significantly through those outbound calling strategies. Our clients today say anywhere from 1 to 10% right party contact rates. And that's dropping, while the conversion rate when you do make contact is the same, right? So if the conversion rate's staying the same, but your right party contact rates are dropping, then your overall collection results are dropping. So they're looking for better ways to engage their consumers. In addition to some of the technology changes, we're also just seeing consumer preference changes. That's what Ian has alluded to. And I think there's a big pressure here for people to engage on platforms at their convenience, on modes of transport. I keep saying this, channels of their preference, whether it's email, whether it's SMS, whether it's a web chat functionality. That's the consumer preference of 2023.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the other things that has kind of driven the evolution of these digital communication strategies is the whole idea of right party contact and the availability of data. As more organizations have looked to move down this path, more files that are being purchased from the creditor, including email addresses or other communication methods, or even the communication preferences that consumer had when they were working with the originating creditor. And with the addition of that data and the new rails by which we can communicate, it really does kind of change the game a little bit in terms of our ability to focus on that right party contact. But, Dave, from your perspective, right, Reg F rolls out, and how did you feel the impact of that change? Did you find that, I know the assumption is always that we can do that now and we're going to jump right into it. And I remember, talking with regulators about why organizations have not just immediately moved into sending direct messages through social media channels and haven't just started deploying all of these things because of the technical challenges behind it. But what was it like for you guys supplying a service like that as that rule change happens? What was the reaction of the marketplace from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a good question. Leading up to the change in November 2021, there was a lot of uncertainty, right, about the change that was coming. Generally, I see Reg F as a digital friendly regulation that clearly outlines rules around engagement through digital channels. SMS and email are clearly allowed, provided that you have consent, provided that you provide clear opt-out languages in the communication. So generally, our customers have been very favorable to the change, and it has helped us push the adoption of digital collection strategies more. I think it also helped, I hate to say it helped during a global pandemic, but the The COVID situation put a lot of pressure on call centers. It made staffing in call centers very difficult. Generally, we've seen the tenor of call center agents shortening, so it's harder to retain that talent for longer. So that, combined with Reg F, has made a pretty heavy push towards the digital first or digital only collection strategies.
Yeah.
So the general assumptions.
I was just going to jump in and add on to that. When you look at Reg F and the real heart of it and where it really impacts is, yes, it does, kind of provide the language around adoption of digital, but it also severely limits your capabilities from traditional voice channels, right? So putting that blinders on, or limiting on what you can do voice wise, as long as you're not harassing, and you have the consent, digital, is a better medium to reach out and stay within compliance. Now, there are other compliance aspects, outside the federal government, but as long as you stay within those guidelines, digital is more advantageous.
So it sounds like from your perspective, it's kind of changed the powerful channels, meaning it's a redirection of which channels we're using to communicate. We're being limited in one area, so we're moving into other areas, partially because it's new and it's available, and it is the consumer preference for specific segments of consumers, but it's also becomes the primary channel in a lot of instances because of the limitations on the standard voice channel.
Right. And talking with some of our clients, many of them, simply because of, we're a highly litigious industry, are being overly conservative when it comes to the Reg F limitations and restrictions. So,
right.
I think that lends more to the digital as well. People it's risk avoidance, right?
Sure. Well, and I think, as we talk about the next piece here, which is the data insights, right? Now that these digital communication rails are being tied back, and that's this is kind of the crux of why I thought this was a great webinar to include these two groups in, is that, we've got the rails, right? Like where Dave is working on the rails of those digital communications and the reduction of friction for the consumer once they've received that message, where Ian's looking at the collection of data that's created through that process and being pushed back into the system of record to be used from a strategic standpoint to improve your communication channels. So we've got one side that's working on how to get those messages out and reduce that friction. And we've got another piece here that's looking at, when we've done that and we've collected that information, how do we then bring all of that together for business intelligence? And I'm actually, for those of you that have watched these before, I'm clearly not in my studio today because I'm on site with a client. And one of the things that we've been talking about is reporting and understanding what happened in the past, but business intelligence being trying to predict the future. And I think when it comes to these digital communication channels, the level of information that we're able to obtain from a digital communication that's not necessarily available from a phone communication really does improve some of the opportunities to generate actionable business intelligence from the information that's being gathered. Does that sound about right, guys?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So with that being said, let's take a look and talk about some of the components of actual digital communications. And so if we're talking about what is included in a digital communication, I know that there's a couple of different pieces here that are kind of newer, interesting, and exciting. So, from that perspective, Dave, do you want to start walking us through a little bit of some of the components of a digital communication strategy?
Yeah, I can speak specifically to what Remitter offers here today. And we speak with a lot of our clients and prospective clients that are leveraging some component of a digital communication piece, right? Whether that's SMS, whether it's email, whether it's direct drop voicemails. And those are typically in separate silos, web chat, online, IVR, all of these things, right? Remitter is providing most of those today. And I just want to provide some context where we use this. We use this in early stage collections to support call centers, and we use this as a third-party post-charge-off service through our partner company, Mercantile, who we acquired back in October of 2021. Yeah, so I think the key here is how you're using those, how those communications are speaking with one another, how you're gathering data, back to the data insights piece, how when you send an SMS, how when you send an email or a direct drop voicemail, or how you're tracking that consumer's engagement with that digital channel. Did they click on a link in an SMS? Did they open an email? When did they open that email? What's their preferred channel? And then automatically pivoting based on their preferences. That's a really key component. And then the interoperability of all of these platforms together so that your systems are all communicating with one another and you're aware of how many attempts you've made to engage. That's a key component as well.
Agreed. We did have a question come across here too about how digital communications can predict the future. So let me address that quickly, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts on it as well. But from my perspective, the actionable business intelligence comes from me better understanding it. So as an example, even through my CRM system, I know the best time of day to communicate with Ian Winder. I know that I need to send him an email at 3:34 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that is the most likely to get the fastest response, because based on all of the communications that I've sent to him, I'm able to run predictive algorithms in the background to better understand him. And then when I have consumers that have similar attributes to Ian, then I would be able to leverage that predictability of understanding what has happened so that I can better predict the future. Now, digital communications versus phone communications are going to have additional layers of data included in them. So emails have headers, right? And I can track open rates and other things that, yes, I can track some of that from a phone perspective, but I think the predictability of what time they opened something. So an email that's sitting in their inbox, I can now measure when they opened it. If they opened it at midnight, I still know they opened it at midnight, even though I sent it within the FDCPA approved hours. And so from our perspective, I think that's where we're able to start generating some of that information, collecting data, and then using that through algorithms to better predict how somebody else might respond to it that has similar attributes. And I'm going to avoid going deep into the attributes because I feel like I'm going to start getting into people's secret sauce. And
yeah, I mean,
everybody's got their secret sauce.
You hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, we can predict the future as best as we can. It's about reviewing those behavioral analytics and letting that feed an algorithm that predicts the best time, the best content, the best channel to engage a given consumer, and make the best guess that we can based off of their individual actions, right? So it's predicting the future to the best of our abilities and more than any analog approach would ever allow.
Well, I mean, I left my crystal ball back in the office, so I can't predict with 100% certainty, but I can come up with much better guesses, or at least drive myself in the direction of success and be able to measure how close am I to that success. But I also look at it from a funnel perspective.
Right. I was going to add one piece. It goes beyond the communications too. It's where are they on a payment platform? Where are they clicking? Where are they hovering their mouse? How long are they on a given page? Tracking all of that detail. And then you might see that, let's say they went to a payment plan page, they didn't take action. That might suggest that they want to take an action, but they just need some sort of prompt to do it again. And we can follow up with a message that's going to be very tailored to that specific activity that they made on a given portal as well.
Well, even comparing it back to like an Amazon, for example, right? And thinking about e-commerce, like being able to think about all of this as a funnel, and that I've got, the communications that went out, the communications that were opened, the communications that were clicked, or our click-through rate, and then what happened. So like, as we're getting closer from I sent out a message to I'm getting a payment, we can start looking at things through standard e-commerce funnels that have already been refined through years of selling products online. And now we're able to apply some of that knowledge and technology in new ways, which I think is very interesting.
100% agreed. That's why we're all here.
Look, and as we talk about the communication channels here, or those aspects of the components of the digital communication channel. So we're talking about texting, which is, whether it be prompts for payments, reminders, whatever, but you've got that new set of rails that we're running down in terms of text messaging. And I know from the data that I've seen, the probability of increasing value proposition is, from a an email will be opened over certain periods of time, but I see much faster results when I'm sending a text message. And even internally as an organization, we have different prioritizations based on the different communication channels that we use internally to talk to each other. And I think the consumers are ultimately looking at it somewhat the same way if we look at this from a data perspective. Do any of you have stats on the increase of online payment self-service portal usage? So that's an interesting question as well, Teresa. And what I would say to that is every organization is going to have different stats based on the services that they're providing. So I've seen massive shifts towards the consumer portals. And how is that integrated into the website? How is that integrated into the communication channels? How is that ultimately being integrated into even the conversations that the agents are having when someone's more comfortable putting their credit card in online? I won't order from a restaurant that I have to call and give them my credit card number over the phone because they're reading it back to you in the middle of a restaurant. It makes me uncomfortable. I prefer to order from places where I can order it online, because that's my communication preference. I assume that others have similar preferences. So just something to consider as you're going through that process and evaluating what are how are consumers moving in that area. My focal point is always on how are we integrating it into our systems, and the level of integration that we provide is ultimately going to determine the value proposition. So for some organizations that are not truly transforming into the digital world, it's going to be a little bit different. But I'd also suggest tomorrow morning we're going to be releasing a receivables roundtable with my friend Aaron Stewart from Success KPI that talks a little bit about digital transformation, and that might be something you want to take a look at tomorrow morning.
And I'm happy to share a couple of stats from case studies that we have publicly available. We had a telco client that ran a champion challenger with their internal calling strategy, and they ran it. They split their portfolio into two, where they continue with their existing portfolio and their existing call and collect strategy, and then they did call and collect plus remitter. Over the course of a year, they doubled their collections through the remitter plus calling strategy. Another one of our clients, a large national online lender, looked at their rate of collections with their call center team and over a 52-week trailing average. And they sent their collection team home for a few consecutive Fridays, and they ran a digital only strategy with remitter. And they saw 4% improvement in total dollars collected through the digital only strategy. That was after only a few Fridays, which typically we see those numbers go up as we see the technology adapt and learn the consumer base. Another one of our, I'd say probably the largest rent-to-own provider in the nation, ran a 6-month pilot. Well, they're now a long-term client now, but over a 6-month pilot period, they saw a 64% reduction in outbound calls. And they maintained the same rate of collections. And a cool thing that they were able to do is they were able to redeploy those collection agents to other parts of their business. And so they reduced their overall cost of collections, and they maintained that same rate with less agents, which is a win-win.
Excellent.
Stats. One other cool stat, I think, is that of the debtors that do cure through our technology or do resolve their past due accounts, 90% of them do that without speaking to an agent on the payment platform.
Look, if I can make a payment online, I'm not picking up the phone.
I would do the same thing.
That's just the reality of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And from a vendor side too, I mean, when we talk to prospects looking at a CRM solution for debt collections, one of the leading questions is, do you have a portal, or can you integrate to a portal? Mm-hmm. Now, I don't have any stats around the performance of that, but that seems to become higher up in the priorities of what a good solution provides you, right? It's that enablement to connect to or offer those kinds of non-traditional communications.
And we've seen a massive shift in just the portals themselves. So if we look at what 10 years ago, it was let me go to a single web page. I have to enter my account number, and I'm just making a one-time payment, and that's the only option available. Now portals are getting to the point where I can check my balance, and I feel like we've started to extend the banking experience into the collection space, right? There was a point in time where they had this full online suite of tools when they were with Bank of America, for example, and now they're moving over into the collection side, and now the technology has changed exponentially. So if we, the more that we've been able to bring those two worlds together, I feel like the more success we've seen.
Yeah, and the other, I mean, you talk about the evolution, right, of self-service, going from that single payment, setting up a payment plan, but negotiating as well within the boundaries of what they can do. So it's no longer being channeled down, this is the amount. It's more around, make an offer, right? And if it's acceptable, we'll take it, which reduces some of that concern around, being overly aggressive on what's an acceptable payment to us, because it's now selected by the consumer.
And if it's tied back to the system of record, you can use the same negotiation parameters that the live agents on the phone have, so that you are creating a consistent experience across all of your channels.
Absolutely, especially in agency space when you've got multiple clients you're collecting from. Each of them can have different, boundaries on what's an acceptable method, what's an acceptable arrangement, terms, and so on.
Yeah, that's
drilling down to the portfolio, right? So it's not just the client requires this, but the client may have 5 different requirements based on the 5 portfolios placed with the agency.
Yeah, absolutely. Crucial component around payment plans that are accepted, settlement offers that are offered, how we get to those settlement offers, what are the parameters of the payment plans, where we accept a partial payment, a whole lot of parameters that we need to build into the payment portal, again, for clients and also for individual portfolios, as you stated.
So one more question for you as we're on this slide here, because I know we have a lot more material to cover. We're about halfway through. Let's talk a little bit about consent management, Dave. From your perspective and in your world, let's talk a little bit about that piece.
Yeah. So there's 2 components to it, right? Because we have a white label SaaS platform that we offer for call centers and early stage collections or pre-charge off collections. And then there's also the third-party collection service that we provide. Generally, best practice in my eyes is for the creditor to obtain consent at the point of customer acquisition, or at some point, I say just that simple as that. At the point of customer acquisition in a loan doc or credit card agreement, they're obtaining that consent. We support our clients with a QR code that they can put on their letters or that they can send to their customers, and they can scan that on their phone, and they can opt in for digital communications if they want. We also add that on the agency side. If our creditors have not obtained consent, we can put that in the initial disclosure letter, and we can try and turn them into a digital customer going forward. So yeah, that's one piece. The other piece is really providing that clear opt-out language in every communication. And so that's in every email, that's in every SMS. They can reply stop, they can opt out with a link, and then managing those. So we want to provide those reports to our clients on the SaaS side, managing them on the post-charge-off side. So we're never sending digital communications if they've opted out. We provide those reports to our clients on the early stage side so that they know that this is someone that they're going to have to pursue with an outbound calling strategy. And so that's really it. I'm not sure if I'm missing anything else or if you have any specific questions.
Well, I think that's a pretty good coverage of it. And then we had one other question come in that kind of relates to this slide that I wanted to cover as well. But can you share your experience, if any, with using social media as part of a digital strategy? And so I'm curious, Dave, to hear if it's something that you guys have touched, but from the perspective, as somebody who manages, I think, 40 different social media channels for agencies, debt buyers, and law firms, I can tell you from my perspective, what we've found success doing is using social media as a listening post. We're not necessarily chasing down, we're not running down the path of sending the direct messages through those platforms, because the terms of use on social media platforms is a little bit different. And to be perfectly frank, they're not exactly friendly to the collection industry. As an example, we had 30-something Twitter accounts get shut down a few years ago for posting American flags on Memorial Day. And although they didn't claim that, that was the only common thread amongst the 30 posts that had gone out that day. And so we do have a little bit of a challenge there, but using it as a listening post and allowing people to communicate to it, maybe not in a public method, because you can't, somebody sends you comments on one of your posts, for example, and starts talking about their account, you can't respond there. But what you can do is what I like to call the Comcast method, right? If you get really mad at Comcast, and I feel like they're one of the most hated companies on earth here, but if you get really mad at Comcast and you go onto social media and you start blasting them, they don't just start arguing with you in a public forum. What they do is they say, I'm really sorry that you had that experience. Here's 5 options for communication channels where you can reach out to me directly and we can discuss this and resolve your situation. And I think that has been a successful strategy in leveraging social media in your digital communications. Anybody else have any thoughts on the leveraging of social media?
Not really. I think you really touched on it and covered it. The problem that I see in the social media side is, there's a risk, right, from a disclosure standpoint. Social media isn't necessarily private. Anybody sees the comments. Other people have access to my social media, right? So there's not things that I want to have come out there because there's too much risk to it.
Yeah, I can say it's something that we've evaluated. We haven't put a heavy push in it. I think generally our thought is there's an opportunity potentially with retargeting our consumers through the social media portal or platform, but it's not something that we have heavily pursued at this time.
Fair statement. So moving on to our next area here, and Optichannel is something that we've started to hear around the industry. I remember the minute I heard it for the first time, it was at a conference last year in the fall, and somebody started actually explaining it to me. And so I'm going to explain it the way that I understand it, gentlemen, and then you guys correct my understanding. But omnichannel being the ability to communicate across multiple channels and to carry the context of the conversation across multiple channels. Whereas Optichannel is choosing the best communication channel for that consumer at that moment in time.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got a preferred method of communication, right, that's your Optichannel. If you measure to earlier conversation, opens, click rates, bounces, whatever, that can also help drive that Optichannel from a best channel perspective. Omni is great, right, because it's a layered strategy. If I don't have a preferred channel, I'm going to make X a number of attempts to contact someone via this channel, then I'll switch to a different channel and back and so on. But also, to your point, being able to transfer that conversation, if you like, across the different channels.
Yeah, that's where it comes back to having a lot of these communication channels housed in one place and the data insights that we collect along the way. I can say at Remitter, all of our communications start out as omnichannel, right? We just start sending out various different communications, whether it's an SMS, an email, or voicemail drop. And then we start to hone in on their preferred preference. And that's when it becomes Opti and we pivot to their preferred channel. So I think we have a lot of our clients who do have omni-channel approaches today, but they're not automatically pivoting, and it's hard for them to determine what that optimal channel is.
And I think the more information that you're collecting from a consumer over time, the more you can start to hone in on the right time and place by which to communicate over an individual channel. But to your point, Dave, having everything in one place and not having disparate systems for each of these communication channels would assist you in managing your replies and responses. So you're not putting yourself in this difficult situation where you need to integrate 5 different platforms. If you can bring your communication channels under one umbrella, it really does simplify things.
Yeah, and we also need to understand that digital channels are conversational channels, right? It's not a one-time send a message and be done, because there's replies and responses. So keeping that conversation alive within, in my world, within your system of record, within your CRM, so your agent can actually look at that whole history of the conversation that's taken place via that channel. Improves efficiencies, because I'm not having to hunt and peck and look and find different information in different places. Yes. So, managing the replies and responses, it's conversational. You've got to have them. The system of record has to have those, or visibility to those, because that also helps drive the next strategy, the next step.
I think that's a great point, Ian. Having that full track record of the communication, so an agent can review that. It's not a digital or call it's both right now. And we've seen a lot of folks try to do the digital only, but we're not quite there yet, right? And so for your agents and people who are still maintaining a calling staff, it's really important that they can track that entire history, and then they can pivot. And if there's ability for technology, which there is, it's a little plug here, and maybe we'll get into it later, for you to track all of those replies and then use an intent score to bucket those replies into a high, medium, or low propensity to pay, then those agents, you're really giving them tools to more effectively manage their calling queues.
Well, I think that's interesting. And so we had another question come in. How do you feel about AI technology for communications? I'm going to float that to both of you guys. I have an opinion as well.
AI, yes. I mean, because it goes back to looking at the results and then predicting, that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier too. It's decisioning based upon historical. It's decisioning based upon similarities. Yes. So in my opinion, that's how AI helps drive that, is the engine behind analyzing, looking at your info that you have available to you, and then using that to suggest, predict the next direction to take in your communication strategies.
Fair. So you look at AI in the communications channels as an engine to drive decision making on what messages to send when, and how to decision the next action.
And it could be a logical extension to that, is actually having the AI engine drive that for you rather than just suggesting it. It's actually acting on it. Yes.
Absolutely. Now, Dave, I think that this question also is really talking about some of the AI technology that's being used in the digital communication channel itself. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we use AI and machine learning to drive our communication cadence, messaging, the channel of preference, the time, right? So there's a lot of AI that goes into, and machine learning that goes into that communications. I feel like this question might have been going a little bit towards the whole chat GPT, which everyone's very excited about and looking at, which of course we have discussed as well. We do have a lot of our clients today, we've integrated with their web chat functionality. And so we can drive web chat functionality through our clients' web chat, through our payment portal. But as the APIs become available for chat functionality like chat GPT, that'll be a really interesting avenue to explore.
I agree, but you did bring up something that is the core of my thought process based on the question, which is the separation of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I think that those two areas, I don't know how I feel about outbounding with AI, but I think IVR has become more complex through the years. Now, I do think that the AI, as another question is coming through here, from a call perspective, I think it's great in the training environment. It's great when you're trying to get somebody up to speed quickly so that they can get on the phone and have those conversations. As an agent communicating with the AI to become a better agent, I don't know if the consumers are going to view that in very much the same way. For those of us that have called our airline to try and change reservations, and you find yourself screaming, agent, 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 that to me is frustrating. And so I think that if the application of artificial intelligence can improve that piece, right, or improve the experience for that end consumer, I think that's the angle where it's really going to start to shine. Now, when we talk about all of these channels coming together, the complexity of the strategies that we're able to devise across multiple channels generally can be improved through the use of machine learning. The machine is watching what's happening, it's looking at the results, it's measuring those results, and it's learning over time. And the more data that it has to develop the model around that decision-making process, the more accurate it's going to be. Fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so let's
comments.
move on from here and talk about the strategy considerations. Like, what are some of the things that we need to be considering as we're planning our digital strategy? So, from my perspective, the regulatory and legislative piece is always big because we've got Reg F and other regulations that are restricting our communications, and that needs to be baked into the strategy. Right? We need to make sure that we're doing that. And I think also from a compliance standpoint and making sure that we are picking up that information and using it accordingly. So I think that it helps to put some guardrails on what the strategy ultimately will be. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. When you look at the regulatory landscape, we talk Reg F, but let's also keep in mind that we're looking at leveraging digital channels, but some states have enacted more restrictive controls around digital communications as well. Reg F just really calls it out. You can do what you can use the channels, just don't harass people. But other states have got down into frequencies and maximum attempts and so on. So your strategy has to take that into consideration. It's not just, oh, I can use digital now. It's yes, but who am I sending it to? Where are they at? What compliance risks or challenges are there specific to the individual I'm targeting to get this message?
So as we've been talking here, we had two really good questions come in that I'd like to address because I find these questions to be more valuable to the audience than our deck. Has anyone tested how much value outbound call centers provide? What blockers do you see in replacing an outbound call center with digital channels? And so there's one word in that question that changes my opinion, and that is ultimately replacing an outbound call center. And I don't think that's the intent of digital communications. We're not trying to say you can't do that anymore. Now you can only do it this way. I think what happens is that these things start to come together and combined because Ian's preference for communication might still be phone, and mine might be email, and Dave's might be SMS. So it's not about removing that altogether. It's about working together. And sometimes the SMS that goes out to Dave might prompt a phone call to come into the call center. So you can't just be like, well, we're going to go straight digital and we're not going to talk on the phone anymore. I feel like it's a hybrid approach has been the most successful. I don't have any stats on hand to support my opinion. However, I do believe that is, that's just what my gut tells me after 20 years of consulting in the space. Anybody else have a thought on that?
100%. Digital communications is one leg of a strategy, right? It's not the only strategy, because yes, I may have your email information, I may have your phone number. People don't always open emails from entities they're not sure of, or reply to SMSs. Yes. So the traditional tried and tested phone call, yes, obviously some people don't pick up the phone, it goes to voicemail, but it's another tool within the tool belt, right? That's what it is. It's not, digital doesn't replace, in my opinion, just my opinion, doesn't replace everything else. It's just another way of doing that outreach and that communication.
I totally agree with both of your statements. It's another leg of the stool, and I don't think we're replacing outbound call centers anytime soon. There is a piece there where the digital can enhance call centers and vice versa, right? So to the deck, Pierre, we have system integrations. How are all of your system of record, your LMS, your CRM, your digital communication platform, how are all of those systems speaking with one another? We had an interesting case study where one of our clients saw a 35% increase in payments per talk time hour after they launched with our technology. And that was through calls, right? That was through their call center. So their call center was still working, but the technology helped optimize their call center metrics, because the consumer, and oddly enough, being a tech forward person, I still prefer to speak with people. And so someone received that SMS or email communication, and they read about their debt on the platform, and they wanted to speak with somebody. And then they called in, they clicked a button, directly routed straight through to the call center. And then the agent picked up. And because the consumer had all this information about their debt in that communication, the written communication on the payment portal, they just want to speak with someone, and they made a much quicker payment or shorter period of time. So I think
that makes sense.
I think it's in tandem. That's the short takeaway from that. Right?
Here's another great question that just came in. Is there a hierarchy of products that will work with omnichannel? Example, payday loans versus credit cards versus installment loans, and a hierarchy on age analysis, for example, 30, 60, 90, or write-off. Now, I can address the first piece here, I think, fairly simply, which is there a hierarchy of products? I would say there is a hierarchy of consumers. And what I mean by that is when we talk about the PDLs, so payday loans or online loans, fintechs, I think are more apt to move towards a digital strategy because they originated through a digital strategy. But if you look at auto loans, for example, you may have a section or a segment of the consumers that did that loan online. You're going to have a segment that did it different. You're going to have a different segment, that's doing it differently. And so I think based on how that loan was originated could be a good predictor for for what channel those people may prefer. But Dave, I can see the smirk, and I feel like you got some actual data to share.
Yeah, I would have thought the exact same thing. But we had a client where we did an analysis of their collections, the collectability of their accounts for those that were originated online versus brick and mortar, and they were shockingly close. So
really, okay,
yeah. And so I'd say anecdotally, I agree with that. But from this one study that we conducted with a client, we were shocked to see that the brick and mortar collected digitally almost the same. Just an interesting stat that we've seen in terms of the hierarchy of age analysis. Digital can work across the whole thing, right? It works particularly well for early stage collections because there are often those chronic late payers, right, who just need a prompt. So they get a digital prompt and they go, wow, okay, let me log in and make a quick payment. And then as you get to the later stage collections, the 90 days plus and post charge off, it works particularly well there because your cost of engaging those consumers is so low that compared to human capital costs, it's a fraction of the cost. And so it works particularly well in that sense as well. So there is a place for it across, I think, all delinquency buckets and all debt segments in the post charge off space.
Interesting. I can stand corrected here because I know that you guys are running those kinds of tests, but I think that my gut telling me that people that are more digital friendly are going to tend to move more towards it. So I'm interested to see how that data evolves over time, right? As we run larger swaths of testing against that type of strategy, I'm interested to see how that starts to unfold. So please keep me in the loop in the future as you
absolutely.
run more there.
And keep in mind, the data varies wildly from client to client, right?
Sure.
Are you dealing with a subprime or deep subprime or prime client? Are you dealing with someone? What is the age of those clients? Are they young? Or customers? Are they younger? Are they older? There's a lot of factors that go into performance of various portfolios. So I'm always hesitant to say hard and fast rules about how something will perform.
No, I think we're talking about predictors at this point, right? Because like we've said, every organization is different, and the mix of the portfolios and the segments that they're receiving, even the same portfolio being purchased by a debt buyer and divided out to 5 or 6 agencies is going to have different segmentations. And so I think from what you're saying, it makes a lot of sense. One of the other things that we talked about previously was about the staff training, right? And so training your staff as to how digital communications works, and whether that be pre-scripting, whether that be a deeper level of training on how to communicate in written format through those communication channels. I find that to be an interesting approach to controlling that if it's free form in any way.
It's a good question. We have the ability to turn this on and off in our platform for agents can freeform. A lot of our clients prefer to turn it off, and they want to have pre-approved content that can be sent out, and that's it. And so you have that something that's been approved by their legal and compliance team, and that automated, or if it's sent out as a prompt by manually by an agent, it's pre-approved content. So yeah, the free form is not something that we actually see a ton of, even though our platform does allow it.
So I can completely agree with that. And I think that that is, again, something that's going to evolve over time. I was reviewing a platform from CoinTech, which is basically an AI it's an automation legal review of printed letters. And that's what their platform is focused on right now. But I think as that type of legal evaluation platform, moves over onto the digital side, that we may see more of the opportunity for free form, but maybe not. I just know that there's some technology that's starting to be developed in that space that could make for an interesting addition to the strategy.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah, I would too. I mean, but that's very tightly controlled who has access to freeform capability, right? And I know on the collection side, especially reviewing collection letters and communications, you template things, right? You just here's my template, and I put my data in, and nothing changes because this has been approved. Yeah. This is what's been approved, and so on. So yeah.
Well, hopefully we'll continue to evolve, right? I don't know that there's a master solution to it, but hopefully we will continue to evolve as an industry.
And now, with staff training, I also see a huge benefit is how long does it take to train your staff to come up in collections, right?
Sure.
So giving them tools that will help increase how many accounts they can manage is hugely beneficial, and also augmenting that staff with a digital collection strategy that is more scalable than hiring full-time employees is a key cost saver for call center companies.
So as we talk about the next pieces of a digital communication strategy, building your deliverability team. And for those of you that watched my podcast, you have seen me talk about this actually with Chris from Remitter, talking specifically about the deliverability of email and SMS. Because when Reg F first happened, I was in a meeting with regulators who basically said, well, I don't understand why you're not just sending out 1 million messages. And to explain, well, there's technical barriers to us doing that. We appreciate that you have alleviated the concerns from a regulatory or a compliance standpoint, but that doesn't necessarily change what we're able to do from a technology standpoint. Because if I just go sending out 1 million emails, and a lot of them get marked as spam, I've now shot myself in the foot, and it's going to take a long time before I can dig out of that. And so let's talk a little bit about, MX and IP reputation, and the risks associated with becoming blacklisted by some of the major email servers, because the largest percentage of consumers are using Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, AOL still, which just pains me in so many ways. But we still do see a lot of those free email services used by consumers over time. So Dave, you want to kind of address a little bit from a deliverability standpoint, the level of importance it holds in, getting those messages out to the consumer?
Yeah, I mean, it can't be understated, right? It's I'll put the plug in there for the Chris Helton episode 105, I believe, with a receivable roundtable with you. So that was great. Thank you for that. And but it's the same as the right party contact, right? If you can't get through, then you're going to have no success in converting that into a payment. Mm-hmm. So managing your domain reputation, managing your deliverability is key. Some of the things that we do, right, is we warm IPs. We'll stagger our outbound communication, so we're not sending 1 million at a time. We manage multiple, on the agency side, we manage multiple domains, right? Because we're using our clients' domains on the early stage side, but on the post charge-off agency side, we manage multiple domains. We score emails. So we look at those emails, and if you see something that says, Q hashtag %sign at ymail.com, we're going to see that as a high risk email. So we'll use a different domain to send that email than we would for something that says Dave Snow at remitter.com. And we would use a different domain, so we can manage our domain reputation that way as well. So lots that goes into it. We have a whole team that manages this. I'm not the best person to talk about it. Obviously I get it. And then also there's pieces with really simple things with subject lines and what's contained in the body of the emails, attachments, long URLs, and again, the content that is in the actual subject and the actual body of the email will impact your deliverability as well.
110%. You cannot overlook the content in the email, especially the subject line. And if you're using all caps, stop it. Stop it right now.
Right.
That's a bad move, and it's not helping anybody. But also, I had done a roundtable with Kim Fan a couple of months ago, it might even last year, where we talked about the Can Spam Act and how that has an effect, because the opt-out is also important and is a compliance risk. If you don't have the opt-out included, it is a requirement under law. And although it's not a collections law, we're still bound by it. So if you're unfamiliar with the Can Spam Act, I think that's something that you need to understand if you're going to start trying to send out I really just any kind of digital communication, whether it be SMS or email. And with all of that being said, in the last 3 minutes that we have in our presentation today, I thought we'd talk just a moment here about the content testing, because we have two different pieces that we want to try and cover in 3 minutes here. But like we mentioned, the A/B testing of your content. So what content is actually being delivered to the end users, and how are you testing that? Your subject lines, your understanding of what's working for each consumer, and getting that measurement. And so we kind of covered this on the last slide. So I'm going to jump to our last slide here, which I think is probably the most important one. And I'm sorry that we're going to try and cover it so quickly. But how are you measuring the success of your digital communications channel, Dave?
Ultimately, at the end of the day, it comes down to payment conversions, right? So how deliverable are the messages that we're sending is number one, right? How many emails got through, how many SMS got through. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is how many payments converted on the payment portal. So we look at deliverability, we look at open rates, we look at click rates, we look at that to generally look at the funnel of conversion to inform how we're engaging. And then at the end of the day, it's how many of our clients debtors or our own debtors through the agency side are self-serving through the payment portal. That's kind of it at a very, very high level. I know we are really short on time, so I could probably.
That's all right. I want to throw one more thing in here, right? So payments is the deepest measurement of success. But I think one of the other things is that all of these other ones, the deliverability, the opens, the clicks, the conversions, those are all factors that can help you to refine your strategy in order to drive more payments. So the payments being that underlying success measurement, but each one of these pieces in your, again, kind of like an e-commerce funnel, but each one of the pieces in that e-commerce funnel are ultimately going to give you some insights as to where you can tweak your digital communication strategy to improve it and start collecting more money online.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're constantly A/B testing with content, whether it's creating new content and loading that into the platform, whether it's automatically pivoting based off the consumer's engagement. And we are seeing open rates from 45% to 80% plus. Again, that varies by client significantly. We're seeing click-through rates on the email side of 10 to 60%. Again, you see a huge range there. SMS 6 to 31, 32% click-through rates. These are kind of standard collection stats we're seeing through our platform.
Is that unique open rate or overall? So again, I'm going to measure both the unique open rate and I'm going to measure the overall open rate, because both of those have a different weighted value within my evaluation. So that kind of hits our last question. All right, gentlemen, we are hitting our hour here. I want to thank everybody who's watching for taking the time to listen to us today. I'm hoping that you got something out of this. If you have additional questions, you'll be getting an email after the session has ended, and we'd be happy to continue answering questions for you. If you have additional topics that you'd like to see me cover with this group, send me an email, Facebook, LinkedIn, smoke signals, however you want to communicate with me. I am omni-channel. So feel free to reach out, and hopefully I can convince these gentlemen to come back on and continue creating great content for a great industry. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, all the prep that goes into planning a good webinar and all of that, but I really appreciate you guys participating today.
Thanks for
Yeah,
having me.
absolutely. Thanks for inviting us.
Everybody, thank you again, and we'll see you again soon.